Hello again, everyone. Welcome back. I hope you've all absorbed some of that energy and passion from our previous speakers, Ronnie and Stefan. Now we move to our final speaker of the day, and it is my pleasure to introduce June Leung. June's a Senior Manager, Identity and Access Management at Moneris. And if you don't recognize that name, every time you make a debit, you tap your debit card in a transaction across Canada, you are using Moneris technology. Now, June has over 15 years of experience in the information security field, leading identity and access management and encryption programs within the Canadian financial industry, including Moneris, RBC, TD, and FundServe. June currently leads identity and access management at Moneris, but also regularly coaches young professionals in their pursuit of cybersecurity careers. Thank you, June, including talks at Cyber and Tech Risk and at Ryerson University. Please join me in welcoming June, who is joining us today from Toronto, Ontario.
Thanks, Catherine, for the introduction. And hi, everyone. Good afternoon from Toronto. And today, we're going to talk about identity and access management. Why is it in a spotlight recently? And so the first question coming to mind is, well, is identity and access management actually important in higher education? Why do we not need to worry about IAM? Isn't it everyone that we work with? You know, we're all friendly, one big family, students, faculties. Well, you know, that is true. But at the same time, this morning I was reading in conversation.com between August 14th of September 12th this year, so less than a month, 63% of cyber attacks were targeted in the education organizations. So why is that? Well, because there's a lot of open source systems, program used, the network is not as tight, and this is where people, you know, you have a lot of PII data, right? Like you with student records, faculties, and then later on with alumni information. You do a lot of research that is private and confidential. So it's a big mine of data, gold mine that people wanted to get tabs into. So if you if there risk with this data, if you think that this data is important and these threat actors need to access your environment somehow to exploit your vulnerabilities to get this information, then your information needs to get protected. So a few examples I thought of was that, well, if a student, you know, ComSci decided to decided to change their marks from 40% to 90%, is that an issue for you? If private records of faculty students changed, is that important? Research data, again, before you published, is already all over the internet or dark web. Can you put a price on that? And also ransomware. Ransomware is a big thing. And if they lock up your database, are you going to pay? So if you don't have a good view of who is accessing your data and your environment, whether they're authorized or not, then how would you know how to protect it? So for me, identity access management is definitely an important pillar within the higher education field. So now, let's say I convinced you and you'd be like, hey, you know what? I am going to run a program, and what do I need to do? So of all the companies I worked in the past, and with any security program, I have concluded that for security, it needs to be top-down. Well, why is it top-down? Why can't you bottom up? Because the nature of security is the fact that actually no one likes security. And they were like, you're here, you stop me from working, you're putting barriers. So, but they don't understand sort of the rationale behind why are these barriers put up? It's not for me, it's for the organization that hired me, right? So because you have no choice, because you need to execute your mandate, then you need to have the support of your executives and your board. So they need to make sure that, like, if you wanted to, for example, today, everyone can walk around on campus. And tomorrow you're like, no, in order to come in, we have gates everywhere. You need to tell me who you are, and you're going to tell me why you are going in. People are not going to be, oh, sure, why not? They are going to give you a reason, and they're gonna voice their dissatisfaction. So in order for you to have an effective program, you need to make sure that the board, the executives, they support you. If there's anything that people complain, well, someone's there to actually tell them to, well, this is why they're doing it. So the next step, once you get the board, is to build policies and standard. And that's the main reason is when you're building, you need to have something back on. If someone challenged you and say, hey, why are you checking me now? Well, you're going to say, this is the reason, right? And if you don't have those reasons and backed on with your policy and standard, how would you be able to explain yourself, articulate yourself clearly? And also not just you, it'll be the entire team, right? Explaining this is why we are doing it, and this is why it's good for the organization. If you say, you know what, I'm starting something new, I have nothing to go with, where do you go? Well, you don't need to start from thinking about all the controls. There is the NIST cybersecurity framework, as well as the ISO 27-1 that you can actually reference and see, adapt the framework and see what within that framework works for your organization. There are times that people implement the whole thing, but sometimes it's like my control is based on the NIST framework. As long as you're not certifying that IAM, if you certify ISO, then you do need to check every single tick box. But if you want to start something new, that would be a good place to take a look and see what works for you. And as well as when you're writing these controls policies, it actually makes you do a reflection, say, hey, do I really need this control? Is it applicable to me? Is it applicable to our organization? And then that way, you will have a better success when you are implementing, because you thought through it. Work with the stakeholders, because once you identified, what you need to do, you need to find out, I don't know, some organizations have like crown jewels, because you can't do everything. You can't just go and do everything at the same time. You got to prioritize. Do I do A first, B first, and C first? And so once you have a list that you have prioritized, then you can work with your stakeholders and also based on your strategy that you got approved by your executives, which one to work first. And it's important to figure out who are the owners of these things. And let's say you wanted to clean up IDs. Well, if you don't know who the owners are, how do you clean the ID up? And can you just delete them? Is it going to be impacting your systems in your university? Maybe it's running a batch jobs. So it's important also to identify the owner and work with them. Okay. So next thing is about anything, Catherine mentioned. I worked for a while in this field. So out of all the projects that I've executed, if you say, June, what are something that it's actually that's for successful implementation? So for me, executing a project is actually easy. Because why? Well, because if you have funds, you have a good product, you have good vendor support, you have a skilled and engaged team, you're all set, right? But if you're setting up a team, the business case already been approved by the vendor, and the business case has already been approved by the board or the people that are hiring you. You don't really know what the rationale of this case is. And same thing for if you're hiring a team, the team don't really know, you put a business case together. The team doesn't know they may have an idea. Everyone has an idea of what you're rolling out or what you're trying to implement, but they don't know the details. And that, to me, if the team is building a car and they go build a sports car, is really good. But at the end of the day, if you wanted that car to go across the country, then that sports car is not going to help you. So it's important, especially in security, that if you are building it because you lack of a control, then you need to understand, what is this project going to do? Is it to remediate vulnerabilities? Is it to mitigate risk? Is it due to regulatory compliance? Or it is part of my cloud journey? You just need to know what that is, communicate, and have people understand, so that when they are making decisions on the day-to-day, they don't need to come to you. They know that, okay, this car is for this. So obviously, if I have two choices, if it's simple choices, I'm going to go this A, because I know that A option works for the purpose that I'm doing what this car is for example. And later on, when you have a bigger project team, bigger issue, then the decision to decide which option to go for, it won't be that difficult, because everyone is on the same page on what you're trying to build and what you're trying to deliver. Okay, so today I'm gonna next I want to sort of touch on a little bit about processes, because the topic of day 2 is about processes. And so there's a few angles that I want to touch on when it comes to processes. Are you building a new process? Are you enhancing a manual process? Are you automating a process? Because with identity access management, process is everything. You're building a service or you're offering a service, user need to know how to get to it. So if you are tasked to build a new process, okay, a new process because something is not working, or I want to build a new service, is it related to a control? Then you need to make sure there's a standard behind it, because same thing, you're building a new control. The standard has to give an example or backing up why this control is going to be in place. Again, my example of putting, verify when you get into campus. Well, that is a new process, and there has to be a control behind it and a standard behind it. So brainstorm with the people who are going to build this process with you. So if you say, I need to build a new SSO portal for the users, well, in your head, well, my users, my faculty, staff, students, maybe volunteers, well, anyone else? So maybe there are more, but you don't know until you're talking to the folks that are on the ground. They understand your business case, understand the purpose. Then they might give you surprises. Oh, these people actually access to the portal as well. You're like, really? Because you might not know without talking to people. So I know a lot of times with security, we don't like talking to people. We just wanted to get the requirements and work. But I think with specifically identity access management, it touches a lot of areas within the company, the university, the organization. We need to talk to people. We don't just go in silo, because that's when you build products that does not suit anyone else but you yourself. So when it comes to revamp processes, I see that a little bit more sensitive, because there is a process in place today. Well, whether it works or not, whether you felt that is relevant or not in current world, but someone is executing it or someone built it. So it depends on, the team, how long they've been in the organization. You might ruffle some feathers if that process has been there for a while and these people are executing it on a daily basis, right? So it's good to understand where this process came in from, if they knew history, why was this stood up, 10 years ago? Is that environment is still necessary? Is this process still necessary? And if it's not, then you are safe to take it off, because the last thing you want is you kill the process. Well, you actually remove some other functionalities that you didn't know of and is out of scope of what you are delivering. I also wanted to, mention that, for example, in an access project, we're really good in giving people access because people need it, they want it. We're also pretty good when people terminate, because we know that I think at this day and age, we know that when someone leaves, we need to remove the access. But what about when they change access? Meaning, I'm moving now, I'm a student in ComSci, I might have access to these machines that I'm doing my research on. Well, I decided that I don't want to do ComSci anymore and I want to go into fine arts. do you remove students' access? Because that's where in organizations, that's where the risk is because as you move within organizations, you get different access, you accumulate different access that are no longer relevant to your new role. So that's where the least privileged principle come into play. Okay, so I have covered the half of that, and now let's talk about cloud because everyone wants to talk about cloud today. So because I came across this cartoon and thought it was actually funny and to the point, because a lot of regular folks they don't really know the difference between on-prem and on cloud. They're like, I just access it, and they're right. It shouldn't be any difference to them. It should be seamless. Whatever service I'm offering today on-prem and tomorrow in the cloud. But now with the cloud, there's actually something different, and they don't know about it, but we do. Well, so what is that? Well, is that identity is a new perimeter. You've heard about this, I'm sure. A few years ago when I first heard about it, I was like, wow, that is true. Because now we are no longer sitting behind a firewall with nothing else to protect us. Identity is the only thing. So how do we secure the identity? I'm assuming all of you have some type of services in the cloud. I do too. And before I'll be like, we're not putting anything in the cloud. But now it's like, what do you mean you're not putting anything in the cloud? It is an outlier if you're not putting anything in the cloud most of the time because of all these various reasons. So to me, I think if you're standing up a new service, identity or not, you need to decide whether you want it to be in the cloud. And if you do, make sure you do the pros and cons, because there's a lot of advantages out there for sure for the cloud. But at the same time, there's also a lot of restrictions. As you get into with your vendor or get into your services, you'll be like, I can't do that. I can't do that, especially if you are shifting from prem to on the cloud. So there's a lot of things that is a new learning, is a new field. It's not just the same identity and access management. So let's talk about identity in the cloud. So because it's a new field, some of these existing controls that we have in play today, they become a little bit different, or they become a little bit more important. So identity proofing is one of these things. Because if you've never seen the user, so identity proofing is that I want to make sure that I establish a process to verify that the person's claiming they're who they are. So I want to make sure that June has access to my service A, and she only has access to service A. She's only authorized to access service A. So once it is established, every time June logs in, you're like, okay, it's good. Because other than knowing that is June, you may have other points in your system that you check as well. So that's where authentication come into play. Is that continuous authentication of is she coming on the same devices that she comes in usually? What about the location of her, things like that you check, right? So you also wanted to now now you employ also MFAs, because in the cloud for multi-factor authentication, to me, I don't think is an option anymore. I think is actually the norm. The question is, when you implement the MFA, don't just say, I implement FAA. What MFA, what type of MFA have you implemented? What are the factors that was considered when you are implementing the FAA or putting up the MFA? So these days is very simple, right? Like I would be putting a site, I put in my password, and now pop the next screen. I need to verify you. Do I send an email to your email address, or do I send you a text? Right, that's very common that we use. So that's great. I'm going to say, send me a text. So you give me a choice, right? So the thing is, so that's good. So I get my phone. There's a text. I enter it in, and I'm in. So that's great and dandy if this is a legit person. It's June coming in. what if June left her phone at the desk and then someone actually able to access my phone, and obviously my password's not that strong, right? Like, so you have to look at the different factors. And so now the person has access to my phone, and they have access to that second factor that is showed up on my text. So you would need to figure out, okay, is my data, it all comes to the risk and also the price you put on the data. What this type is, June accessing something that is just, her Gmail, no big deal. But what if she's trying to place a transaction that is $10,000, or what if she's trying to access a research that is actually highly classified? Do you need different types of method? So that may be something you're like, at the time I wanted to actually her using biometrics or something to verify that it is actually her and not someone else who got a hold of her phone, for example, right? So this is something that you would need to consider, and also with users. So the previous screen where the cartoon is, I just upload in the cloud. I think there's education that we need to provide as a service provider to users of our service that, hey, you have some responsibility now that we're in the cloud, because I can't protect you. I can't do everything. So I'm doing 80%, 85%. You need to do this 15%. So we need to start educating folks on how you want them to protect their identities or your assets. The other day I was at Rouse, and then I saw on a page they actually have a whole awareness and education page on what they want their students, their faculties to do with their identity or with security. So this is something that it would be a responsibility of the service provider, you, to give it to the students, and that way, and maybe you have to run campaigns. It really depends on the situation. So once you have the users, we identified them. There's machine identity. It is actually a new, the term is getting very, very hot. And so machine identity, interestingly, it has to do with so what is machine identity? Let me start with that. Well, so it is servers, laptop, mobile devices. It's spread from smartphone, IoT devices, containers, even network devices. Anything that has an IP would consider as a machine, and they would have an identity. So the latest thing is, how do I protect these machine identities? There's a thing now called machine identity access management. So we, so that's actually later on. I'll touch on it. But that is something that you want to consider and say, hey, there's a lot of machines out there now. They will be interacting with each other because processes are automated. There's no human intervention. So if one of these machines that is processing sensitive data and no human intervention, but they have identities and they have credentials that they share, that they trust each other, and if that get compromised, then what, right? So machine identity is something that is coming up, and it has to also to link with the public key infrastructure that 20 years ago, public infrastructure was to manage users, but now they sort of have a 2.0, PKI 2.0 that is using to leverage management of machines. Okay. For authorization, that is so once I have access to the environment, you authenticated me, I'm good. Well, what data do I have access to, right? So it's important to have a clear access matrix of your asset to say, okay, in this application, these roles can access these fields or this data. And if you need to access something else, it has to be another department. So, for example, HR department, they can access all these information, PI information of a person. But if it's someone else who's not HR, but they have a role to play with data of a user, then they may be able to see, the name, like registration, for example, right? They can see your name, what classes, but they can't see, your home address, not your home address, maybe other PIIs that are not authorized. But if you have a matrix, then it's clear when you provision, automated or not, you will know what you allow and what you don't allow. Next one is very important because it's privileged access to sensitive data. So because now the data is no longer in your perimeter in the company, right? It's out in the cloud, and you have you have different types of data. So what the example I gave earlier with PII data or these research data, you need to know, okay, well, June is authorized. Okay, that's good. She's part of the team. She's authorized to see this research data. But do I have it? Do you want me to have it all the time? Should I have persistent access? Because what is my risk appetite of the organization? If June has persistent access, that means she can access 24/7. Does she need it? And you always want to think the worst case scenario of like, okay, so what if she uses data and to do something bad, right? So that's why you have this in the industry talks about zero trust, just in time. Well, what is that? That is actually when I need to use that data, I will request it, and someone would actually approve it at the time. So the question is, do you have a person that is available, sit there, let's say I work 9 to 5, sit there 9 to 5 and say, hey, are you anticipating that you need this? And if you do, because they need to click on, yes, I allow June to access that data, then I will have it for, time period. Is it 5 hours, 5 minutes, whatever your policy is. So before you jump into deciding how long, what type of privileged access you wanted to provide, should I do just in time or not, understand your risk appetite so that when you are talking to the vendors or you talking to your team, you have a good understanding of what is your requirement, and really, do they need it all the time, or can they let me know in advance that they need that data at that time? Okay, so I am going to wrap this up, and the slide is the topic is thoughts on the IAM crystal ball. June, do you have anything? What are your thoughts on identity access management? So if you don't know by now, I love this field. I've been here. I didn't know that there is a thing when I joined. It just happened because 10 years ago, 15 years ago, there's no identity access management. Let alone that now you have identity access management for the enterprise. You have identity access management for the customer, so they call it CIAM, and also now I mentioned the machine identity. They're actually interesting and say. Would a CIAM solution actually fits a university? So that is maybe something you have already explored or you're going to explore. But I found that we're no longer playing, a supporting role in the cybersecurity movie sets, because before, when people say, "Oh, cybersecurity," and they would never think about identity access management, right? They would think about the SOC, they're thinking of the hackers, fighting the hackers, the good guys, the white hat. But now it's actually, people actually know. I'm like, wow, you actually know what identity access management means. So I think we are going to, the number of users is not going to grow that exponentially, but the number of machines is going to grow exponentially in the next few years. So now the focus is going to shift a little bit on, instead of just users, because we've sort of ironed that, tackled that in the last 10 years. Next would be the machine identity. What are some of these solutions that are coming up? DevOps containers, there's a lot of containers they spin on and off. Well, how do you give it an identity today, but not tomorrow, right? And there's a lot of data that IAM has. There is, where users are going, when they have, there's a lot of data. And I don't believe we have actually got a extracted the data and look at it and examine and say, and give us some aha moment in there. Because to me, because we don't have, we need to sort of deploy AI and machine identity. I know this is terms that, again, AI, but there is a legitimate reasons to have that, because you have a lot of vast identity data store. There's a lot of things in there. And it would be impossible for a human being to look at all the data and pinpoint any of the gaps or any of these. Maybe there's an opportunity there. We won't be able to do that. But as the machines start learning these things, oh, this person do this, or this person does this. Oh, it comes. That I think that will be at the next level. In the next few years, that will be something that we're going to explore, and we're gonna find out. To me, I don't have the crystal ball on what we're gonna find out if we apply AI machinery to identity and access management. But trust me, that will be something, and maybe we're discussing that in the next few years. So that's all I have for today, and hope you enjoy it. And Catherine, back to you.
Well, thanks very much for that, June. A few questions come to mind kind of immediately based on your presentation. It seems for many, identity and access management implementation seems more difficult than perhaps it should be. How can we demystify the technology to enable the controls and flexibility that the community needs?
So as I mentioned, great question, Catherine. As I mentioned, it sounds daunting, but when it comes to it, it has more to do with the fact that we don't know what. Sometimes we don't know what the purpose is, because there's so many sections of identity and access management, right? Do you want to do privileged access management? Do you want to do regular user access management? Are you talking about non-people ID here, machine identity, or machine identity, non-people ID? Are you talking about provisioning? Like, are you talking about attestation and review? I didn't even touch on that. So what are we talking about there? And that way, after we have identified which section or which pillar you want to implement first, it becomes so much more easier. When you implement. It's actually not that bad.
All right, clarity of purpose, always important in everything we do. Question from the audience: what are the best practices to federate identity and access management across organizations? And the context is increasingly research databases are accessible to researchers from multiple institutions. So do you know of best practices to federate IAM across organizations?
So the first thing that comes into mind with the word federate is about trust. So you need to establish a baseline between the organizations that you want to federate with, right? And then maybe, whose identity am I using to come into play? If I'm accessing, if you and I are talking, or is it a three-way discussion? So, or multiple in this case, right? So we need to establish what type of identity to access, what type of data each individual, which organization have access to, and again go through the list of does everyone have the same access? How do you give access? If you say, yeah, you know what, everyone is we're one big happy family, we wanted to learn from each other. Well, okay, that's great. Just think about if there's any data that you don't want to share, or you don't want to end up in the dark web, or because if the answer is no, then yes, that definitely build something, it'll be much simpler. But if there's something that, this is confidentiality, because if you talk about with the corporate hat on, legal team's going to be involved. If legal team's involved, you're not going to get that far quickly, right? But maybe in a university setting, you don't have to worry about the legal team as much as in corporation.
All right. Thank you, June. Many of us, you make purchases. I bought some tickets off Ticketmaster, and they wanted me to verify my identity through Facebook. And you see that for many companies. Facebook, use your Google credentials or Microsoft ADFS. Do you think it's okay to shift the responsibility for IAM to the private sector in the way we see?
So I'm going to be, it's like a broken record. I'm going to go back to your data. So what service are you trying to implement, right? If I'm trying to implement a service that it doesn't really matter if it's Catherine or June, as long as there's some type of level of trust that the person's there. As long as let's say you need someone in jurisdiction. Let's say you cannot sell, or the service you provide is only located in North America. So this type of you can use social, like Facebook, Google, use for authentication. But at the same time, if you are standing up a service and you are or people purchasing your data, then you might want to have a little bit more, because I don't want to sort of gave my identity, sort of delegate my identity to a third party that I have no idea. I don't know how Google accept users, other than, your email is unique, good enough, right? Your phone number is unique, there's an identity. So if you just want to collect, this is just, I purchased something, make sure that, because there's the balance, right, between ease of use of customer friction and security. So we always have to balance that. We always have to do in the balance act. So to go back to the question is, I would say, if you are okay of just collecting user, yeah, as long as it's put in the name, they put in a credit card, I'm good enough. Yeah. But if you say, no, I want to make sure that is June because I'm giving some very sensitive information, then no, I think you need to put your, you need to be in control.
All right, thank you. I'm going to circle back to something you said at the very beginning of your presentation, which is in direct conflict with what Stefan said in his presentation previously. So he talked about delegating cybersecurity responsibility right down to the individual user. And you talked about a top-down approach to IAM. Can you comment on the appearance of the dichotomy there?
So I think it also, maybe there's context. Stefan is from a very sophisticated organization. Let's say because I didn't talk to him, so let's say he has that frame in mind. So if the organization has a very strict policy that, hey, when you're logging in, when you're coming in to join the organization, these are the rules, and people follow rules, and they respect the boundaries, and they understand it. It's not just, and also maybe that network is so tight that really there's nothing they can do about it. So then you say, so I can see how he sort of say delegated individual, but to me, it is I'm responsible for user access, and to me, I would not delegate it to the user, because it's not I don't trust them, because I don't think they have the same frame of mind that I have. I think security is a very specific field. My brother always say, June, I hate you. Well, not like he hate me physically, because he works in an organization that has a lot of processes that are implemented by the security team. He has no appreciation of why these things are implemented, and to him, it's barriers. So if I let him make decisions, he's going to be like, no, I'm not going to play with any of these rules because I don't see the value in it. But I see it. I see it because of whatever reason, Mesh, is it because we have to comply with, if you don't do this, you're not going to get your license, and you're not going to be able to operate because you are not FFICC compliance, PCI, there's a lot of things that we do in the background. So that's why communication is important. Before you put in all the rules and tell people you now have to jump 5 hoops, explain to them why 5 hoops. They're not going to like it, but at least explain to them so they have an appreciation of why you need to jump 5 hoops.
All right, thank you very much. I'll share a comment that came in with the chat from Kevin Wade, that at academic institutions assign multiple privileges to a person rather than having existing profiles with the proper privileges and then dropping the person into those specific profiles. So that facilitates future changes in function without removing a person's access. And of course, that makes sense when you have transient populations of students, but transient populations of faculty as well.
I think that would be, it's interesting. I think the work would have to be done very clear on the different privileges that are defined, right? And also every time if people wanted these type of privileges and they are, let's say there's a segregation of duties between these privileges, then the administrator would have to go and do that change all the time. So my question would be, it's good practice. My question would be, how would you know that today I need A and tomorrow I need B, and how quickly can you do that? So if there's a way that from the book of record or some way there's a indicator that, yeah, today June's going to be here, she's going to get this. Tomorrow she's going to be here, she's going to get that. She's not going to get that access that yesterday. That's amazing. That's great. Like I would love to talk to you and see how you actually implement that. Yeah.
All right. Well, I want to thank you, June, on behalf of all of our guests at the CANARIE Summit today and on behalf of the CANARIE team. Digital identities, of course, are one of the foundational elements of cybersecurity and evolving landscape, and we appreciate your sharing your insights and expertise with us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.